the silent tide. It was late August of 2008 when I first set foot in Riverton, a small coastal town with more stories than its winding streets would let on. I had just started my first year at Riverton College, excited for the new chapter in my life. Sharing a cramped dorm room with me was my old buddy from high school, Ben, who had a peculiar habit of hoarding every item he could possibly need, or so it seemed. One Saturday afternoon, after spending hours cleaning the dorm, I suggested to Ben, "Hey, do you want to get out? Maybe head to the beach for a walk?" Ben, who was buried under a pile of clothes and textbooks, barely looked up. "Not today, man. Too much stuff to organize. You go ahead." I had always lived in the highlands, far from any coastline. The allure of the sea was something I'd longed for. Riverton's proximity to the ocean was one of the reasons I had chosen this college. With a hopeful heart, I grabbed my beach towel and headed out alone, eager to soak in the salty air and the endless horizon. The sun was beginning its descent as I arrived at Riverton Beach. The sight was nothing short of breathtaking. The sun cast a golden hue over the water, and the sea breeze was refreshingly cool. Seagulls cawed and swooped above, their wings cutting through the orange sky. The rhythmic crash of the waves against the shore was a soothing symphony. I wandered along the beach, my feet sinking into the soft, warm sand. I marveled at the scene, as if it were a dream brought to life. As twilight approached, I found a large, smooth boulder and sat on it, gazing at the horizon. The setting sun painted the sea with shades of crimson and purple, blending into a tranquil masterpiece. Time seemed to stand still. 2 hours later, the sun had vanished, and the first stars began to twinkle. Temperature dropped and I started to shiver. As I prepared to leave, something caught my eye. The beach behind me seemed oddly different, as if parts of it had been swallowed by the sea. The realization hit me. Tide was coming in. I stood up and walked cautiously toward the water. The waves were rising faster than I anticipated. The water was now up to my waist, and the current felt stronger. Panic began to set in. I dashed back towards the shore, trying to avoid getting too soaked. A sudden wave crashed over me, drenching me completely and causing a sharp pain in my foot. I looked down to find a deep cut, but the urgency of the situation kept me from dwelling on it. I scrambled out of the water, my clothes sticking to my skin, and hurried back to the dorm. Ben was lounging on his bed when I burst through the door, dripping wet. "You went to the beach?" he asked, staring at my sodden state. "You look like you took a dive." Before I could respond, Ben's face turned ashen. Stammered, There was a woman. Behind you, I saw her." I was too exhausted and cold to process his words. "What are you talking about?" "There was a woman with long hair and a yellow dress. She was right behind you," Ben insisted, his voice trembling. I turned around, half expecting to see someone, but the room was empty. "You must be seeing things," I said, trying to dismiss his concern. "Maybe I just caught a cold or something." The next few days were a blur. I woke up the following morning with a raging fever and aching all over. My body felt like it was burning from the inside out. Ben was visibly worried as I lay in bed, shivering uncontrollably. By the third day, he and a few classmates rushed me to a nearby hospital. The doctors were baffled by my condition. I had a high fever that wouldn't break and was bedridden with pain. The local news was on in the hospital room, and Ben sat beside me, watching with a distracted gaze. An emergency report was unfolding. "Authorities have discovered the body of a young woman who drowned at Riverton Beach," the anchor announced. "She was found a week after she went missing. Clothing was described as yellow, and she had long hair." Ben's eyes widened, and he glanced at me nervously. "That's the woman I saw," he whispered. My heart pounded in my chest. I began to piece together the events. The area where the woman's body was found was the same part of the beach where I had been trapped. It was too much to ignore. The idea that I had come into contact with a ghostly presence was chilling. I tried to push the thoughts away, focusing instead on getting better. By the fourth day, fever started to wane, and my condition improved. But the sense of dread lingered. The ghostly woman's appearance and the eerie connection to my illness left me shaken. The years passed, and while I graduated and moved on, memory of that night never truly faded. I continued to visit the beach in Riverton, drawn to its beauty but haunted by the experience. Each visit was a bittersweet reminder of the sea's allure and its hidden dangers. Riverton's beach was more than just a picturesque location. It was a reminder of the thin veil between the living and the dead. The water, while inviting, held secrets beneath its surface. Secrets that had once ensnared me in its silent embrace. And though I tried to leave that part of my life behind, I knew that Riverton's beach would always hold a piece of my past. Place where the waves whispered stories of the unknown, and where the tides of fate once nearly claimed me. It was late 2019 when Ken Roberts and his colleague, Kevin Kip Barnes, set out on a business trip to a small town in the suburbs of Massachusetts. The job was straightforward: visit a local factory, assess the site, and return to their Boston office with the report. They were both in their early 20s, enjoying the perks of working for a growing tech company that occasionally sent them on these trips. They had been friends since college, and trips like this usually felt like mini vacations, a break from their routine. The day had been uneventful, the factory inspection going off without a hitch. They wrapped up by late afternoon and decided to head back to Boston before nightfall. But as they drove down Route 89, a long and winding road known for its dense forests and lack of streetlights, the mood began to shift. "I swear, this place always gives me the creeps," Kip muttered, glancing out the window as the sun dipped below the horizon. Ken chuckled, trying to lighten the mood. "What? Scared of a few trees, Kip? You know these rural roads are like this. It's just the countryside." Kip wasn't amused. He leaned forward, squinting into the growing darkness. "It's not just that. Have you heard the stories about this road?" Ken raised an eyebrow, curious. "Stories? Like what?" Kip hesitated before speaking, as if unsure whether he should bring it up. "People say this road is haunted, especially around here. You know, the whole ghost woman walking the road thing. Lots of accidents happen on this stretch, and the locals blame it on her." Ben rolled his eyes. "Come on, Kip. Ghosts? Really? You've been watching too many horror movies." "I'm serious," Kip insisted. "There's something about this place that just feels off." Ken didn't respond right away. The road ahead was now completely dark, with only the car's headlights cutting through the inky blackness. The trees seemed to close in on them, their twisted branches reaching out like skeletal hands. Even Ken, usually the skeptic, couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. They had been driving in silence for a while when Ken suddenly slowed down. Up ahead, barely visible in the weak beam of the headlights, was the figure of a girl walking on the side of the road. She was dressed in what looked like business attire, a short skirt and a blouse, her slim figure moving slowly in the dark. "Do you see that?" Ken asked, his voice low. "Yeah," Kip replied, his eyes fixed on the girl. "What's she doing out here? It's the middle of nowhere." Ken's first instinct was to offer her a ride. "Maybe she's lost or something. Let's ask if she needs help." Kip hesitated but nodded. "Yeah, okay, but be careful." Ken honked the horn lightly, trying to get her attention. The girl didn't respond. She didn't even turn around. Confused, Ken honked again, this time a little louder. Still nothing. "Maybe she didn't hear us," Kip suggested, though he didn't sound convinced. Ken pulled the car closer to her, rolling down his window. "Hey, do you need a ride?" called out. The girl kept walking, her movements slow and deliberate, as if she didn't even hear them. Kip leaned forward, squinting at her through the windshield. "What the hell?" Suddenly, Kip's expression changed. His face drained of color and his voice trembled. Ken, look at her face." Ken turned to see what Kip was talking about. As the car drew closer, the girl's face came into view, illuminated by the headlights. But what they saw wasn't the face of a lost girl. It was something out of a nightmare. Her skin was pale, almost translucent, and her eyes were nothing but black, empty socket. Blood trickled down from her eyes and mouth, her expression vacant and horrifying. Ken slammed on the brakes, his heart pounding in his chest. "What the hell?" Kip was shaking, his voice barely a whisper. "It's her. It's the ghost." The girl suddenly stopped walking and turned to face them fully. Her head tilted unnaturally to one side, as if her neck was broken, and her blood-stained mouth twisted into a grotesque smile. Kip screamed, "Go! Get us out of here, Ken!" Ken didn't need to be told twice. He slammed his foot on the gas, the tires screeching as the car sped down the road. But as they drove, the girl didn't disappear into the distance like a normal person would. Instead, she seemed to be right behind them, a figure growing larger in the rearview mirror. "Is she following us?" Ken asked, his voice filled with disbelief and terror. Kip looked over his shoulder, his eyes wide with fear. Yes, she is. Faster, Ken, faster." Ken pushed the pedal to the floor, car roaring down the dark road. But no matter how fast they went, the girl was always there, just out of reach, her hollow eyes locked on them. After what felt like an eternity, Ken spotted a rest stop up ahead. Without thinking, he swerved into the parking lot, slamming on the brakes. Car skidded to a halt. Both men scrambled out, gasping for breath. Kip's legs were shaking so badly that he could barely stand. He leaned against a tree, his chest heaving. What the hell just happened? Ken was equally shaken but tried to keep it together. "I don't know, man, but we need to get out of here. Let's just take a minute and then we'll keep going." Kip nodded, though he was still clearly terrified. Yeah, okay." The rest stop was eerily quiet, the only sound being the rustling of leaves in the cold night air. The forest surrounding them was dense and dark, trees blocking out what little moonlight there was. Everything felt wrong, like they were being watched. Ken looked around, trying to spot anything unusual. But the only thing that stood out was the oppressive silence. "You good, Kip?" Kip nodded, though he was visibly shaken. "Yeah, I just need to, you know." Ken understood and gave him some space. Kip walked a few feet away, standing behind a cluster of trees as he tried to calm himself. But as he stood there, the silence was broken by a low, eerie sound, a faint, unsettling moan that seemed to come from the depths of the forest. Kip froze, his heart racing. He slowly turned his head toward the source of the sound, and his blood ran cold. Emerging from the darkness of the trees was the girl, the same girl they had seen on the road. Now, she looked even more twisted, her movements jerky and unnatural, like a puppet on strings. Her head hung limply to one side, her eyes still bleeding, her mouth twisted into that same horrible smile. She was coming closer, her bare feet dragging along the ground, a yellow dress stained with blood. Kip couldn't move. His legs felt like they were rooted to the spot, his body paralyzed by fear. He tried to scream, but no sound came out. The girl's pace quickened, her mouth opening wider, revealing blood-stained teeth. Just as she was about to reach him, Kip finally broke free of his paralysis. He turned and ran, his feet pounding the ground as he sprinted back to the car. "Ken, start the car. She's coming." Ken, who had been leaning against the car, smoking a cigarette, saw the terror on Kip's face, and knew he wasn't joking. He jumped into the driver's seat, fumbling with the keys. The engine roared to life just as Kip threw himself into the passenger seat. Go, Kip screamed. Ken didn't need to be told twice. He slammed the car into gear and peeled out of the rest stop, tires screeching as they sped back onto the road. But as they looked back, they saw her again. The girl was standing in the middle of the road, her bloody face illuminated by the car's taillights. "She's still there," Kip whispered, his voice trembling. Ken didn't answer. He was too focused on getting them as far away from this place as possible. But no matter how fast they drove, the image of the girl stayed with them, haunting their thoughts, their fears. They were almost halfway back to Boston when Kip's phone buzzed. It was a message from their boss, asking for an update on the trip. Kip's hands were still shaking as he typed out a quick response, trying to keep his mind off what had just happened. Ken was driving in silence, his knuckles white as he gripped the steering wheel. The road ahead was dark and empty, with nothing but the headlights cutting through the night. But even in the silence, both men couldn't shake the feeling that they weren't alone. Kip looked over at Ken, his voice barely above a whisper. Do you think she's gone?" Ken didn't answer right away. Kept his eyes on the road, his mind racing. "I don't know, Kip. I don't know." As they rounded a bend in the road, Ken and Kip saw it. An unexpected sight that made both of their hearts skip a beat. There, in the middle of the road, stood the girl again. Her figure was faintly illuminated by the headlights, her long hair hanging in matted, bloodied strands. Her yellow dress fluttered eerily in the wind, the blood stains now dark and almost black under the car's lights. Ken's grip tightened on the steering wheel. "Not again," he muttered, his voice shaking. Kip's eyes were wide with terror. She's still here. How is this even possible? Ken tried to slow down, but the brakes squealed in protest as he tried to control the car. The girl remained motionless, her empty eye sockets fixed directly on them. As they drew closer, Ken's heart raced, and he could feel the cold sweat pooling at his back. "Ken, don't stop," Kip said urgently. "Keep going, she's going to—" Before Kip could finish, the girl moved. It was a sudden, jerky motion, almost as if she were glitching through the space. Her head tilted unnaturally, her mouth opening wide in a grotesque scream. The sound was a nightmarish mix of gurgling and wailing that pierced the car's cabin, causing both men to flinch. Ken's instincts kicked in, and he accelerated, aiming to go around her. But just as he was about to steer past, the girl lunged at the car. Her body collided with the front bumper. The impact was so violent that the car jolted sideways. "Watch out," Kip shouted, grabbing the dashboard as the car swerved uncontrollably. Ken fought with the steering wheel, desperately trying to regain control. The headlights caught a glimpse of the girl's twisted, contorted form as she was flung through the air. She landed hard on the road behind them, but as Ken looked back, she was already up and moving again, her pace unnaturally fast. The car hit something. Ken barely had time to register it before the front end of the vehicle slammed into a power pole. The force of the collision caused the car to crumple, the windshield shattering into a spiderweb of cracks. Sparks flew as the car came to a sudden stop, the engine sputtering and dying. Ken and Kip were thrown forward by the impact, their heads banging against the steering wheel and dashboard. Both men were dazed, their breaths coming in short, ragged gasps. Ken tried to open the driver's side door, but it was jammed. Kip was frantically trying to get his own door open, his face pale and streaked with sweat. "Ken, we need to get out," Kip yelled, his voice hoarse. "She's coming." Ken struggled to free himself from the wreckage, his hands shaking as he finally managed to push the door open. He stumbled out of the car, head spinning. Kip followed, and the two of them scrambled away from the wrecked vehicle. As they looked back, the girl was there again, standing by the shattered windshield. Her head was tilted in a grotesque angle, her eyes still bleeding. Her mouth hung open, the blood staining her teeth and chin. She was moving toward them, her steps slow and deliberate, but there was an unnatural speed to her approach. Kip was nearly in tears. "Ken, run!" They fled into the forest, their breaths coming in ragged gasps as they pushed through the underbrush. The forest was dense and dark, the trees looming like silent sentinels. Every rustle of leaves, every snap of a twig seemed amplified in the oppressive silence. The haunting wail of the girl echoed through the trees, sending shivers down their spines. Ken and Kip ran blindly, their only goal to put as much distance between them and the nightmare they had encountered. They stumbled through the woods, their minds racing with fear and confusion. After what felt like hours, they finally broke through the trees and found themselves on a dirt road. Ken's hands were trembling as he pulled out his phone, trying to call for help. The signal was weak, and the call failed repeatedly. "This can't be happening," Ken muttered, his voice breaking. "We're completely cut off." Kip was sitting on the ground, his face buried in his hands. "I can't take this anymore, Ken. I'm losing my mind." Just then, they heard a new sound, an approaching vehicle. The headlights pierced through the darkness, and Ken's heart leaped with hope. They flagged down the car, and it screeched to a halt. The driver, a middle-aged man with a grizzled beard, rolled down the window. "You boys all right? What are you doing out here?" Ken tried to explain, his words coming out in a frantic rush. "We were driving on Route 89. We saw something terrible." Before he could finish, Kip looked up and froze. The girl was there again, standing by the roadside, not her bloodied face, illuminated by the approaching vehicle's headlights. "No," Kip screamed. "She's here." Driver turned to look, his face going pale as he saw the apparition. "What the hell is that?" The girl began to move toward the car, her eyes locked onto the driver. In a horrifying display of supernatural force, she reached out a bloody hand toward. Driver screamed and slammed his foot on the gas, speeding away from the scene. Ken and Kip were left standing in the middle of the road, their minds reeling. The girl had vanished again, but the terror remained. They knew they couldn't stay here, not with the ghost still roaming the area. "We need to find help," Ben said. voice resolute. "Can't stay here." They continued down the road, their hearts heavy with the knowledge that they were being pursued by something they couldn't understand or escape. Each shadow, each rustle of leaves seemed to carry the promise of more horror. Eventually they reached a small town, where they managed to find help and report the incident. But when the police went back to the scene, they found nothing. No trace of the ghost girl, no sign of the car accident. The rest stop, power pole, and the forest all seemed to have returned to their normal, mundane state. Ken and Kip's story was dismissed as a bizarre accident, their claims of a ghostly encounter considered to be the result of shock and stress. But Ken knew the truth, and so did Kip. They had seen something beyond the realm of understanding, and it had changed them forever. The experience left Ken and Kip haunted. Kip, in particular, struggled with severe trauma. He began to see the girl in his dreams, her blood-stained face appearing in the darkest corners of his mind. He was plagued by night terrors, and his once vibrant personality faded into a shadow of fear and paranoia. Ken, too, found it hard to move on. The sight of the girl's face was burned into his memory. He could never drive down Route 89 again without feeling a cold chill. Tried to move on with his life. The ghostly encounter remained a permanent scar on his soul. Years later, they both found themselves avoiding the road entirely, and stories of the ghostly girl on Route 89 continued to circulate among locals. Some said she was the restless spirit of a woman who had died in a tragic accident. Others claimed she was something far more malevolent. No matter what the truth was, one thing remained clear. Route 89 was never the same for Ken and Kip. The darkness of that road revealed a nightmare they could never forget, and the ghost girl's haunting presence would forever linger in their memories. And as the years passed, the legend of the ghostly girl on Route 89 grew. A chilling reminder of the terror that lurked in the shadows, the suburban night.